When we last left our deep dive into the Viking Age, we were in 871 AD. The great heathen army had basically torn apart Anglo-Saxon England.
They'd conquered 3 of the 4 kingdoms, Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, all gone.
And England was right on the brink. The only thing standing in the way of total Viking rule was the Kingdom of Wessex, led by the very young King Alfred.
It was an absolute crisis. I mean, not just militarily, but culturally. The Norse had changed their whole approach. They weren't just raiding anymore.
No, this was conquest, occupation. They were staying.
And the entire Anglo-Saxon world was hanging on by a single thread.
And like in any great story, things had to get a whole lot worse before they could get any better. So we're starting this deep dive at the absolute bottom. Winter, 878 AD. A moment when, all hope seemed lost.
This is the point where Alfred's crown is basically in the mud. The Viking leader Guthrum, he knew the power of surprise. He launches this incredibly audacious attack on Alfred's court at Chippenham, deep in the middle of winter.
Alfred was celebrating Christmas, or maybe Twelfth Night. And the attack just hits. He barely gets out with his life, and he's forced to flee, not to some fortress, but into the Somerset levels.
Which, you have to understand, is this huge, dangerous expanse of swamps and marshes. He's a fugitive king.
Hiding in the wetlands with just a handful of followers. It's the absolute lowest point for the Anglo-Saxons.
But that moment, that crisis, that's the springboard for everything that comes next.
Alfred's comeback doesn't end the Viking Age. Not at all. It transforms it.
Into something way more complex, more lasting.
Exactly. The Norse go from being these scattered raiders to, settlers, traders, rulers, and genuine global explorers. This period we're covering from roughly 870 to 1066. This is their golden age.
Okay, let's just lay out the sheer scale of what we're talking about here. When you say global, what does that actually mean in the 9th century?
It's staggering. We're talking about Viking kingdoms in Dublin, proto-states in what's now Russia, like Kiev, trade routes stretching all the way to Constantinople and Baghdad.
And at the same time, they're pushing west, all the way across the Atlantic, settling Iceland, then Greenland, and then making that brief but very real jump into North America.
Newfoundland, Canada. 500 years before Columbus, while other Norsemen are trading in Iraq. It's mind-boggling.
So our mission today is to trace that transformation from one man hiding in a swamp to the creation of these sprawling networks that really did span a hemisphere.
It's a story of incredible adaptation and, I guess, an unstoppable drive to explore.
A drive that reshaped Europe, its culture, its law, even the language we're speaking right now.
So let's start with the man who stared into the abyss and saved his kingdom, Alfred the Great.
So it's January 878. Alfred's situation is, it's a catastrophe. Guthrum's winter attack scattered his army. But we need to talk about the genius of that attack.
Right. Why was a winter assault so effective back then?
Because it broke every single rule. Medieval warfare was seasonal, it was tied to the harvest. You fought in the summer and you went home for the winter.
You couldn't get supplies, right? The roads were mud, there was nothing to forage.
Exactly. Logistics were impossible. So Guthrum gambled that Alfred would be completely unprepared. He assumed there was, a default truce because of the weather.
And he was right. Alfred was caught completely off guard, and he's forced into the Somerset levels.
The levels were a perfect natural fortress, a maze of marshes, hidden islands, waterways. You couldn't move an army through there. It was hostile, but it was secret.
And this is where that famous story comes from, right? Alfred burning the cakes.
It is. Oh. Now, is it literally true? Probably not. It's likely folklore that grew up later.
But it tells you something important.
It tells you everything about his state of mind. It shows the king at his absolute lowest point. He's so consumed by the fate of his kingdom that he can't even handle a simple chore like watching bread. It makes him human. It shows his desperation.
So he's in hiding, but he's not idle. He can't fight a pitched battle, so what does he do?
He switches to guerrilla warfare. Classic insurgency tactics. From his hidden base, he sends out small raiding parties. He maintains communication with loyal nobles.
This isn't about winning back land, is it? It's about something else.
It's about morale and intelligence. He's keeping the idea of resistance alive, and, more importantly, he's exploiting a key Viking weakness.
Which was what?
They were amazing conquerors, but they weren't necessarily great administrators. Not yet, anyway. Guthrum's control of Wessex depended on fragile cooperation from the locals he'd just conquered.
So Alfred's raids disrupted that.
Exactly. He hit their supply lines, he intercepted foraging parties, he made Guthrum's occupation feel unstable, precarious, he undermined the whole system.
And then came the turning point, May 878.
After months of this, Alfred sends out the summons. He emerges from the marshes, rallies an army at a place called Egbert's Stone, and the chronicles say that men greeted him as if raised from the dead.
Wow, what a moment. The king is alive, he's ready to fight, the cause isn't lost.
It must have been an incredible psychological boost, and it showed how much loyalty he still commanded. This leads directly to the decisive battle, the Battle of Edington.
So how did Alfred's army, which must have been smaller and less experienced, actually win?
He used the shield wall, the classic Anglo-Saxon formation, but he did it with incredible discipline. The whole point of the shield wall was to absorb the Vikings' ferocious opening charge.
To just stand there and take the punch.
And not break. The Vikings threw themselves at this wall of overlapping shields, and it held. Once their initial momentum was gone, Alfred's men, still in formation, began to push back.
And the Viking line broke.
It shattered. They fled, and Alfred hunted them down, besieging them back at Chippenham until Guthrum had no choice but to surrender.
This was it. A total victory. He could have just driven them out of Wessex entirely, but he didn't.
And that's what makes him the Great. He was a realist. He knew the Vikings were too numerous, too settled in the rest of England to be completely expelled. It would have meant decades more of bloody, ruinous war.
So instead of more war, he made peace. The Treaty of Wedmore.
Which established the Danelaw. This was a formal agreement. The territory northeast of a line running from London up to Chester that would remain under Viking control.
But in exchange for peace with Wessex and one other absolutely crucial thing.
Their conversion. This was the masterstroke. Alfred insisted that Guthrum be baptized as a Christian, and he, Alfred, would be his godfather.
So he's not just an enemy king anymore. He's family, in a spiritual sense.
It completely blurred the lines. Guthrum took the Christian name Ethelstan. Suddenly, the Norse weren't just pagan enemies, they were Christian neighbors. It opened the door for integration, for intermarriage. It was political genius.
But Alfred wasn't naive. The peace was secured, but he immediately starts this massive reform program to make sure Wessex is never that vulnerable again.
And these reforms they're incredible, so far ahead of their time. The main part was the burh system. He ordered a network of over 30 fortified towns, or burhs, to be built all across Wessex.
And these aren't just little wooden forts.
Oh no, these were major engineering projects. Huge earthwork walls, ditches. They were designed as defensive strongholds, but also as centers of trade and administration. Many English towns ending in Embury, like Salisbury, get their start here.
And the planning behind it was so systematic. We know this from a document called the Burgle Hittage.
The Burgle Hittage is one of the most remarkable documents of the Dark Ages. It lists every single burh, and then it calculates precisely how many men were needed to defend its walls.
How precisely?
It works out the length of the wall, and then it assigns a certain number of hides, that's a unit of land for tax, to provide the soldiers.
So your land ownership was directly tied to military service for your local fortress.
1 fighting man for every 4 feet of wall. It's centralized, systematic, strategic planning on a level you just don't see in this period. It's almost modern.
He also reformed the army, the fired.
Right. The problem with the old system was that you called up all the farmers to fight, and then nobody was home to bring in the harvest. You could win a battle and then starve.
So Alfred creates a rotation system.
A medieval active duty and reserve system. He splits the fyrd in half. One half is on duty at any given time, while the other half stays home and works the fields. This gave him, effectively, a year-round standing army.
And finally, he took the fight to the Vikings on the water.
He knew he couldn't just copy the longship, so he commissioned his own new designs.
What was the main difference?
They were bigger, but more importantly, they were higher out of the water.
Why does that height matter so much?
Because naval combat back then was basically hand-to-hand fighting on boats. If your ship is taller, your men are fighting from above. It's a huge advantage. It made raiding the Wessex coast a much, much riskier business for the Vikings.
So he rebuilt the military. But it's his intellectual legacy that really cements his reputation. Alfred, the Scholar King.
He was horrified by the collapse of learning caused by the raids. He famously wrote that there was almost no one south of the River Thames who could even read Latin anymore.
So he starts a cultural revival project.
A massive one. He sets up schools at his court. He He imports famous scholars from Europe, and he personally gets involved in translating the great works of the Timotheus Augustine from Latin into Old English.
He's making knowledge accessible.
Exactly, for his administrators for the next generation. And he commissions the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is our main narrative source for this whole period. He's literally writing his people's history.
So when Alfred dies, he leaves behind a kingdom that is militarily secure, administratively organized, and intellectually reborn.
He saved England, full stop. And he laid the foundations that his grandson, Ethelstan, would use to finally push north, conquer the Danelaw, and become the first true king of all England.
Okay, so Alfred makes peace, the Vikings stay in the Danelaw, and this shift from raider to farmer kicks off one of the most fascinating cultural fusions in history.
It really is. I mean, once the fighting stops, you have these Norse settlers, mostly Danes, living permanently on the land right next to the Anglo-Saxons. They have to trade, they have to interact, and eventually they have to marry each other.
How did that merger happen so smoothly? I mean, they were enemies just a few years before.
A big part of it was language. Old Norse and Old English were both Germanic languages. They were actually close enough to be mutually intelligible. Think of it like a Spanish speaker and a Portuguese speaker today. They can basically understand each other.
And that daily interaction left a permanent mark on the English we're speaking right now. Let's start with the most surprising one, our basic grammar.
This is the most mind-blowing legacy of the Danelaw. Old English had its own pronouns, but the Old Norse pronouns for the third-person plural were just simpler, clearer.
You're talking about the words they, them, and their.
Those exact words. They are direct borrowings from Old Norse. Just think about that. These fundamental building blocks of our language were adopted out of sheer practical necessity for Danes and Englishmen to communicate in the marketplace.
That's incredible. What other everyday words do we get from the Vikings?
Oh, hundreds. And they're not complicated words. They're the words of daily life. Sty, egg, window, knife, husband. Emotions like anger and happy, basic verbs like take, get, and give. These are all Norse.
The word window itself, vindaga, is wind-eye in Old Norse.
It is. It's a perfect example. And here's the best irony of all. The word law.
The people famous for being lawless gave us the word law.
Which just shows how wrong that stereotype is. Norse society had a very sophisticated legal culture built around their assemblies, their things. The word lag, law, was adopted into English, and the legal customs of the Danelaw remained distinct for centuries.
So this was a genuine fusion, and you can still see the evidence of it today, literally written on the map of England.
You absolutely can. All you have to do is look for place names with specific endings. The big one is by, which means village or farmstead.
Derby, Grimsby, Whitby.
Exactly. If you see a dense cluster of towns ending in Dumba, you are in the heart of the old Danelaw.
Talk about other endings.
You'll see Thorpe, which means a smaller secondary settlement, and Thwaite for a clearing in a forest. If you plot these place names on a map, the pattern corresponds almost perfectly to the historical boundary of the Danelaw.
So the language and the landscape both tell the same story. Was this backed up by, say, genetics?
It is. Modern genetic studies have found significant Scandinavian DNA markers all across northern and eastern England, right where the Danelaw was. This wasn't just a few warlords taking over. It was a real migration of people.
And eventually, the distinction between English and Danish just faded away.
It became meaningless within a few generations. They were all just English, a new kind of English, shaped and enriched by that Norse presence.
And while all this was happening in Britain, other Norsemen were pushing the boundaries of their world in completely different directions.
That's right. West into the ice of the North Atlantic, and east deep into the river systems of Russia. So the push west actually starts before the Danelaw. The Vikings hit Ireland in the 790s, and those raids pretty quickly turn into settlements.
And one of those early military camps, a long fort, grows into a major European city.
Dublin, founded around 841, and it becomes this crucial hub for trade across the North Atlantic. Its location was perfect.
What were they trade?
Silver was a big one, and unfortunately slaves. Dublin was a massive center for the slave trade, selling captives from Ireland and Britain to the rest of Europe and even the Islamic world.
The Vikings also founded other major Irish cities, right?
Waterford, Limerick, Cork. Many of Ireland's key coastal towns have Norse origins.
But unlike England, Ireland was never fully conquered by the Vikings. Why not?
Political fragmentation. England had 4 big kingdoms to knock over. Ireland had dozens of petty kings and chieftains all fighting each other.
So there was no central power to defeat.
Right. You couldn't conquer the island by taking one or two strongholds. And the Irish kings actually got pretty good at playing the various Viking factions off against each other, even hiring them as mercenaries in their own wars.
Which all leads up to the famous Battle of Clontarf in 1014.
Clontarf is remembered as the great Irish victory that drove the Vikings out. The High King Brian Boru defeated a Viking army. But the reality is, it's more complicated.
How so?
By 1014, the Norse had been in Ireland for over 150 years. They were intermarried. They were Christian. A lot of the Viking army at Clontarf was actually made up of these integrated Norse-Irish families. The lines were very blurry.
Okay, so from that complex situation in Ireland, we jump to a completely blank slate. Iceland. Settled around 870. What drove people to a volcanic rock in the middle of the ocean?
Two things: freedom and land. The settlers were mostly Norwegians fleeing the new king, Harald Finehair, who was trying to consolidate power and, tax them.
These were independent chieftains who didn't want a king.
Exactly. And Iceland offered unlimited free land and a chance to build a society without a monarch. They created something totally unique.
A kind of republic.
A commonwealth, really, ruled by these chieftains, or Goar. And in 930, they founded the Althing, the General Assembly.
Which is often called the world's oldest parliament.
It's an incredible institution. They would meet every summer to pass laws, settle disputes. It shows a very sophisticated legal and political culture.
And that isolation is why we know so much about their myths and legends.
That's the key. Because they were so far from the rest of Europe, their old oral traditions survived. They were written down centuries later as the great Icelandic sagas and the Eddas, which are our main source for Norse mythology.
From Iceland, they make the next leap. Greenland. Around 985.
Led by Eric the Red, a classic Viking character exiled from Norway for murder, then exiled from Iceland for murder. But he was a brilliant explorer.
And a brilliant marketer.
Oh, the best. Calling that giant ice sheet Greenland was a stroke of marketing genius designed to attract settlers. And to be fair, the southern fjords where they settled are quite green in the summer.
And the colony there actually survived for a long time.
For almost 500 years. At its peak, there were about 5,000 people there, farming and trading walrus ivory. But even Greenland wasn't the final stop.
The final step, Vinland, North America, around the year 1000.
This is Leif Erikson, Eric the Red's son. He sails west and finds 3 new lands. Helluland, which is probably Baffin Island, Markland, likely Labrador, and Vinland.
For centuries, this was just a story, a myth, until the 1960s.
And the discovery at Lanceau Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, that was the smoking gun. Archaeologists found the remains of Norse-style turf houses.
What kind of artifacts did they find?
Things that could only be Norse. A bronze cloak pin, iron nails from ship repair, a spindle whorl for weaving wool, and evidence of iron smithing, which the native peoples didn't have. Carbon dating put it right at 1000 AD.
So it was real. They were there, 500 years before Columbus. So the huge question is, why did they leave? Why did it fail?
There were a few reasons. First, it was just too far away. The supply lines back to Greenland were too long and dangerous.
Not enough people either.
Right. We're talking maybe 100 settlers max. Not enough to build a self-sustaining colony. But the biggest reason was conflict.
With the indigenous people?
The sagas call them the Skrælings, and they describe constant, violent clashes. The Norse simply didn't have the numbers to hold their ground against a hostile native population.
So it was just a brief, flickering moment, a European presence that just vanished.
So while the Norwegians were battling icebergs in the west, the Swedish Vikings were looking east, across the Baltic and into the vast river systems of what would become Russia. These are the people called the Rus.
And it's thought that the name Russia itself comes from Rus.
Yeah, the common theory links it to an Old Norse word for rowers, which makes sense because their entire expansion was based on mastering those rivers. The Dnieper, the Volga, they turned them into trade highways.
But these aren't easy rivers to navigate in a long ship.
It was brutally hard work. The shallow draft helps, but the real challenge was getting from one river system to another.
They had to do what's called portaging.
Which means they literally had to drag their boats overland. They'd haul them out of the water, put them on log rollers, and pull them for miles through the forest to the next river. It was incredibly difficult and dangerous.
All that effort had to be for a huge prize. Where were they going?
2 main destinations: the incredible wealth of Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, and the markets of the Islamic Caliphate, centered in Baghdad. They were after Arab silver.
And what were they selling that was so valuable?
Furs. Above all else, furs. Sable, beaver, fox from the endless northern forests. These were the ultimate luxury goods in the South. They also traded amber, honey, and a huge number of slaves.
The slave trade was a massive part of this economy.
It was fundamental. They captured local Slavic people and sold them south. It's a dark history, but some historians believe the very word slave might derive from Slav because so many were sold into bondage by the Rus.
And in return, they got what they came for.
Silver. Massive amounts of it. Archaeologists have found thousands and thousands of Arab silver coins, dirhams, in hoards all across Scandinavia. It's proof of the incredible wealth this trade generated.
And we have this amazing eyewitness account of the Rus from an Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan.
His account from 921 is priceless. He met a group of Rus traders on the Volga, and he was impressed by their physique. He said they were tall as date palms.
But he was less impressed with their hygiene.
He was completely disgusted. He describes in vivid detail how they would all wash their faces and blow their noses in the same single bowl of water, one after the other. It's a fascinating look at the culture clash.
He also witnessed a ship burial, one of their chieftains.
This is one of the most important descriptions we have of pagan Norse ritual. He details the whole 10-day ceremony, which ended with the sacrifice of a slave girl who volunteered to be killed to join her master in the afterlife.
It's an incredibly chilling and valuable historical account.
It connects their beliefs, their social structure, everything.
So their relationship with the big power in the region, Constantinople, is complicated.
Very. At first, they just tried to attack it. There were several big assaults, but the city's walls were massive, and the Byzantines had a secret weapon.
Greek?
The legendary incendiary weapon that could burn on water. It was devastating to a wooden fleet. So the Rus quickly realized that conquering the city was impossible, and Viking pragmatism kicked in.
If you can't beat them, trade with them.
Exactly. They signed trade treaties, and a peaceful commercial relationship took over, and that led to some Norse warriors getting the most prestigious job imaginable.
The Varangian Guard.
The Byzantine emperor's personal elite bodyguard. They recruited heavily from the Rus and other Norsemen.
Why did the emperor want foreign bodyguards?
Because they were loyal only to him. They had no family connections, no political allegiances in Constantinople. Their loyalty couldn't be bought by local factions. They were paid in gold and were considered totally incorruptible.
And a good way to get rich.
Very. The future king of Norway, Harald Hardrada, served in the Guard for years and came home with a massive personal fortune.
So what was the ultimate fate of the Rus in the east? Did they stay Vikings?
No. They integrated completely. They founded cities like Kiev and Novgorod. They merged with the local Slavic population, adopted Orthodox Christianity, and the dynasty they established, the Rurikid dynasty, ruled Russia for over 700 years.
So they went from foreign traders to the founding fathers of a nation.
It's another incredible example of their ability to adapt and assimilate.
Okay, so we've seen the Norse settle all over the map. But now we turn to the group that would have arguably the biggest impact on Western Europe, the Normans.
And their story starts with a brilliant deal in northern France in the year 911. The Frankish king, Charles the Simple, was just exhausted by constant Viking raids up the River Seine.
So he comes up with a radical solution.
A revolutionary one. He basically makes the Viking leader, a man named Rollo, an offer. He grants him a huge chunk of territory, which becomes known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen.
And in return?
In return, Rollo has to convert to Christianity, swear loyalty to the king, and this is the crucial part, he has to defend that coastline against any other Vikings who might show up.
He basically outsourced his border security to the Vikings themselves.
It was a stroke of genius, and it worked. But what's really amazing is how fast the Normans stopped being Norse. Within a couple of generations, they weren't speaking Old Norse anymore. They were speaking French. They adopted French customs, French military tactics.
They became more French than the French, but they kept that Viking aggression.
They did. They took that relentless warrior spirit and combined it with Frankish feudal organization. It created the supercharged military machine.
And they didn't just stay in Normandy.
Not at all. They conquered southern Italy and Sicily. They became major players in the Crusades. They were the military elite of Europe for the next couple of centuries. And all of that is setting the stage for 1066.
At the same time, back in Scandinavia itself, the homelands are finally converting to Christianity.
This is the final step in the Norse world, joining the European mainstream. Denmark converts pretty early, under King Harald Bluetooth in the 960s.
The man our wireless technology is named after.
Yes, the story is that the technology unites different devices, just like Harald united the tribes of Denmark and Norway. His logo is even made from his runic initials.
What about Norway?
Norway's conversion was much bloodier. It was forced through by kings like Olaf Tryggvason. It was a violent process, but by 1030, Norway was officially a Christian kingdom.
And then there's Iceland, which, true to form, did things differently.
In the year 1000, the Althing, their parliament, was on the verge of a civil war between the pagan faction and the growing Christian faction.
Must they put it to a vote?
Sort of. They gave the decision to one man, the law speaker, who was himself a pagan. He went away for a day and a night to think about it.
And his decision.
He came back and decreed that, for the sake of unity, everyone in Iceland would officially become Christian. But he made a concession. You could still practice pagan rites in private.
It was a political compromise, not a religious revelation.
Pure pragmatism. They chose social peace over religious conflict. It's a remarkable moment.
And this era of Christianization leads to the last great Viking empire, the North Sea Empire of Cnut the Great.
Right. This happens because England, after Alfred's time, had become rich again, but its king, Athelred, was weak. They called him the Unready, which really meant ill-advised.
His strategy for dealing with new Danish raids was just to pay them to go away, the Danegeld.
Which is the worst possible strategy. All it does is tell the raiders that you're a walking ATM. It just encourages bigger and more organized attacks.
And that brings Sweyn Forkbeard, the king of Denmark, who conquers England in 1013.
Sweyn dies almost immediately, but his son, Cnut, finishes the job. And Cnut was a political genius. By 1017, he's king of England. Then he inherits Denmark and Norway, and he unites them all into this massive North Sea empire.
And he didn't rule like an old-school Viking conqueror.
Not at all. He ruled as a sophisticated European monarch. He respected English laws. He was a huge patron of the church. He even went on a pilgrimage to Rome.
And he made a very clever marriage.
The ultimate power move. He married Emma of Normandy, who was the widow of the English king he had overthrown, Ethelred. It instantly gave him legitimacy and connected him to the powerful dukes of Normandy.
This is the king from the famous story about commanding the tide to stop.
It is. And that story is so often misunderstood.
Yeah.
It's not about his arrogance, it's about his humility.
How so?
The story goes that his courtiers were flattering him, saying he was so powerful he could control nature itself. So, to teach them a lesson, he had his throne placed on the beach, and he commanded the tide to halt.
And of course it didn't.
Of course not. And he turned to them and said, "You see, only God has this power." It was a public performance to show that he was a pious Christian king, not some pagan tyrant.
So how long did this huge empire of England, Denmark, and Norway last?
It was incredibly short-lived. Cnut died young in 1035. His sons were weak and fought each other, and the whole thing just fell apart. Within 7 years, it was gone.
But for that one brief, shining moment, the Norse reached their absolute peak of political power.
So we followed this incredible 200-year arc, from a few desperate men in a swamp to a civilization that stretched from North America to Baghdad.
The Norse have completely changed the map of Europe. But in doing so, that original Viking identity, the pagan raider in a long ship, it's basically gone.
It's been absorbed. They're now French-speaking Christians in Normandy. They're the Slavic-speaking rulers of Russia. They're part of the very fabric of England. The Viking Age is ending not because they were defeated, but because they succeeded so completely that they assimilated.
Which brings us to the final act, the year 1066, the ultimate succession crisis in England.
The English king, Edward the Confessor, is about to die without an heir, and 3 powerful men are going to claim his throne. Each one represents a different thread of this story we've been telling.
First, there's Harold Godwinson, the great English earl, the Anglo-Saxon choice.
Then there's William, Duke of Normandy, a direct descendant of that Viking chieftain Rollo. He is Viking blood forged in French culture.
And finally, from the north, you have Harald Hardrada, the king of Norway. The last of the great Viking warrior kings come to reclaim Cnut's empire.
And this is the great final irony of the Viking Age, which we'll get into next time. In 1066, the year the Viking Age officially ends in England, a Viking descendant is guaranteed to win.
It's just a question of which kind. The raw, traditional Viking power of Hardrada, or the sophisticated, Europeanized Viking power of William of Normandy.
The world they had created was about to decide the fate of the world they came from.
Join us next time for the final part of our deep dive, as we break down the incredible drama of 1066 and look at the lasting legacy the Norse left behind.